With just a few strokes of a pen, the story presented in this transcript claims a royal inheritance battle was transformed into something far colder than a family argument, a legal war allegedly designed to separate a son from money, memories, and even pieces of his mother's legacy. According to the account, copyright connected to early correspondence was pulled away. Treasured possessions linked to Princess Diana were pushed toward institutional control, and access to capital was suddenly placed behind restrictions that could prove impossible to reverse. But the most explosive part was not simply what was supposedly changed. It was the timing. While attention was fixed elsewhere during the opening days of August 2026, the transcript portrays an entirely different drama unfolding quietly at Sandringham, where King Charles III allegedly moved beyond years of public tension and into a far more permanent battlefield. Paperwork, no shouting match, no dramatic palace announcement, no public warning. Instead, the account describes what amounted to an administrative strike, supposedly using an emergency constitutional mechanism to reshape the inheritance and financial structure surrounding non-crown assets. And if that description is accurate, the implication is extraordinary, because this was being portrayed not as another chapter in a family feud, but as an attempt to make the feud legally irrelevant. The transcript presents Charles as having undergone a striking transformation, moving from a monarch reacting to controversy into one allegedly building legal barriers before another controversy could even begin. In public, ceremonies still surrounded the crown, but behind the private doors described in the account, trusteeship, property, and institutional survival supposedly became the real language of power. An emergency constitutional clause was allegedly invoked to avoid the slower traditional routes of parliamentary or cabinet involvement, while a secret legal instrument described in the transcript as a cortisol was constructed to withstand scrutiny and future challenges. And then came the detail that makes the timing look particularly calculated within the story. The legal activity was allegedly positioned around the noisy events of early August, when celebrity coverage could drown out the dull administrative sound of filings. That contrast is exactly what gives the narrative its conspiratorial edge. Everyone watches the spectacle while the consequential paperwork moves somewhere else. For the family branch living in Montecito, the transcript claims the consequences were potentially enormous, because the centerpiece of the alleged restructuring involved trusts dating back to 1994 and a residency requirement seemingly tailored with devastating precision. That alleged requirement is where the financial story becomes intensely personal. According to the transcript, a beneficiary maintaining primary residency outside the British Isles for 5 consecutive years could become disqualified from accessing the core capital principle of certain trusts. 5 years. That number matters because the account immediately connects it with Prince Harry's withdrawal from active royal duties in 2020. Suddenly, what might have appeared to be a technical residency provision is portrayed as something much sharper, a clock that had effectively been ticking since the royal departure. Once the 5-year threshold was embedded into the legal structure, the transcript argues emotions supposedly stopped mattering. Appeals could be ignored. Negotiations could disappear. The dispute could be answered with dates, residency records, and contractual language instead of family conversations. That is the real power shift being alleged here. The palace would no longer need to win a public argument if the legal framework itself had already determined who could touch the money. And according to this narrative, the restrictions did not end there. The transcript claims the financial safety net Prince Harry may have regarded as part of his inheritance was subjected to an aggressive restructuring containing another extraordinary deterrent, challenged the amendment, and private financial information concerning post-royal commercial ventures could allegedly become exposed through a public audit. In other words, the source portrays a brutal dilemma: remain silent and accept the restructuring, or fight and potentially invite scrutiny into private business affairs. That would turn an inheritance dispute into something resembling mutually assured exposure. The transcript depicts the moment at Sandringham almost symbolically, with the monarch isolated while rain struck the windows, allegedly drawing the boundaries of a new royal order in ink. Family flexibility was being replaced by covenants, sentiment by property law, negotiation by restrictions. But the alleged financial cutoff was only the beginning. The transcript then expands the story beyond money and into identity itself, claiming that the same restructuring reached toward provisions historically expected to benefit Prince Harry and his lineage. The 5-year tax domicile threshold again becomes crucial, because its alignment with the 2020 departure is presented as evidence that this was no generic administrative cleanup. Then comes an even more emotionally charged claim: a historic diamond and ruby tiara associated with the late Diana, Princess of Wales, supposedly intended eventually for descendants of the younger prince, was allegedly reclassified as an official diplomatic gift. That single administrative label would change everything. Instead of remaining personal property capable of inheritance, the artifact could become part of the state collection at the Tower of London, placing it beyond export, private inheritance, or use as collateral abroad. A jewel connected with memory would effectively become untouchable institutional property. The confrontation described in the transcript then exploded into something even more extraordinary, because the alleged restructuring was no longer simply reaching across the Atlantic, it was rattling the future of the monarchy inside Britain itself. Prince William reportedly rushed towards Sandringham after the estate management connection with Kensington Palace was severed, arriving by helicopter despite normal protocol and confronting estate steward David Hill, only to discover that access upstairs had supposedly been restricted under a medical isolation order. Even the central elevator was allegedly disabled, forcing the future king toward the old service staircase, where another shock-weighted, reinforced security doors. According to the account, biometric access had been erased only hours earlier under authority flowing directly from the sovereign. Through the glass, Sir Clive Alderton was reportedly seen carrying a locked dispatch case, marked for international diplomatic transit, and when entry was demanded, an executive order requiring total operational silence was allegedly produced instead. That was the moment the story shifted from family disagreement into institutional lockdown. Unable to force the confrontation without risking an unprecedented spectacle, the Prince of Wales reportedly withdrew to examine the estate documents and discovered the trap had allegedly been prepared long before that afternoon. The transcript claims a routine cross-lease connected with Hyrove contained a reciprocal provision permitting the reigning monarch to reallocate equivalent non-land assets during restructuring. The devastating twist? William had supposedly signed it himself. What appeared ordinary 2 years earlier was now presented as the legal lever allowing his father to move without administrative resistance. By 4 o'clock, the account says the final stage was approaching. Dame Sarah Aspen, Sir John Baker, and Professor David Starkey entered the conference room as independent witnesses under procedures associated with the Wills Act of 1837. William allegedly attempted one final intervention, arguing that historical heirlooms required additional verification from the Victoria and Albert Museum, only to learn that the necessary certificate had supposedly been secured 3 days earlier. Then came the moment everything had allegedly been designed to reach. Sir Clive Alderton reportedly produced another property agreement when questions arose over assets connected with the Duchy of Cornwall, again pointing toward the earlier cross-lease. With the legal routes apparently closing one after another, King Charles entered at 20 minutes past 4 using a silver-topped walking cane. According to the transcript, there was no dramatic argument between father and son. That silence was more brutal. Charles allegedly walked directly toward the document, dipped his fountain pen into the inkwell, and signed, after which the witnesses added their signatures and the Sandringham state seal. And less than 3 minutes supposedly transformed months and years of royal tension into binding paperwork. Immediately afterwards, Sir Michael Stevens reportedly called with news that accounting terminals had locked overseas investment files containing liquid reserves associated with the Duchy of Lancaster. Additional private wealth was allegedly redirected into an independent endowment supporting Windsor Castle and Holyrood Palace, tying money to institutional preservation rather than personal discretion. Across royal and legal circles, the transcript portrays the meaning as unmistakable, informal family understandings were being replaced by residency thresholds, trust clauses, property deeds, and restrictions built to survive future disputes. And that is where this alleged Sandringham operation leaves its most haunting question. The transcript ultimately portrays the House of Windsor as emerging not softer after years of fracture, but legally armored. King Charles III supposedly created structures capable of surviving personalities, disagreements, and even future sovereigns, while William was left inheriting not unrestricted control, but guardianship over a fortified system. The helicopter eventually carried the future king away beneath the Norfolk sky, but the paperwork remained behind. If the account is accurate, the biggest inheritance being passed to the next generation may not be money at all. It may be the restrictions themselves, and once those restrictions become embedded deeply enough in law, the family discovering their consequences may have arrived far too late to undo them.